Alright, so this is a new game I played. Yeah, so we're gonna go through basically, I think we're doing a win and a loss today. So, yeah, let's get into it. This is the first game I played versus my opponent, Mr. M. Schumacher or whatever. It's kind of weird name. Israel? Yeah, Israel. Like, so it's like Jewish or, I don't know. Like, something. I'm not good at pronouncing anything. Let's get into the chess. D4, D5, bishop F5, war, and knight F6, E3, and my opponent plays G6, which is the first strange move here. Now, most people, of course, most people don't play G6. Most people go for a quick C5 in some lines and try to pound me over here, and then we'll play something like this. Maybe we should develop the bishop, knight on C6, and maybe G6, but it's not really a normal thing. G6 kind of transfers into more of a like Grunfeld structure. It's a little bit different than the normal structures that I'm used to. So I of course played the move C4, which isn't the best move, but it allows me to continue with my normal plans in London of going for C4 and the normal things of knight C3, knight F3, and bishop out and castles. So my opponent plays bishop G7. I go knight C3, C6, knight F3. Somehow we got back into book moves, but whatever. Oh, we're in a Slav now. That's what happened. Yeah, and my opponent goes knight D7, which is kind of a strange move. I assumed that the knight, and during the game, I assumed that the knight was going to B6 to put more pressure, but then I thought maybe I'll play B3, and then I should be fine for the future because I have B takes and I can get a lot of space in the center, and I should be doing quite well. Yeah, that wasn't really the idea. I don't think that knight ever did anything. But anyway, so it's all very simple here, very straightforward. I go bishop E2. The best move was a little bit different. The best move was actually CD, and after I thought that he would play CD here, but that's actually almost lost because queen b3 comes with a lot of pressure, and I'm actually quite better there. But yeah, CD was the best move. I go bishop e2 because I'm principled, and I thought, okay, my opponent's probably going to take on c4 now, and I'll recapture with the bishop, and I should be fine. I'm down like a tempo, but it doesn't really matter. And my opponent castles, I castle, average stuff, and my opponent plays this move knight h5. And I think here for some time, because what I can do, I can take, first of all, I can take on d5. That's a free pawn. You aren't hallucinated if you see that. That's a free pawn. But the other thing to think about is after CD, my opponent will take here. Oh, well, not actually, my opponent will play CD. My opponent will take here first. I'll have to recapture, and then this is the position that we'll get. And what will happen is, even though I'm up a pawn, I have an IQP. I have a kind of a weak pawn in f4, but this pawn is actually always defendable with g3. My opponent has the bishop pair, and it's not really that clear cut. It's pretty, it's still pretty wild. My opponent has a lot of compensation, and I didn't really want to get into it. So I decided that instead of bishop g3, which would be kind of like the second best option, which just gets into this position, which is pretty normal, I decided to go for something a little bit different with the move bishop g5, which gets an inaccuracy. Admittedly, it gets an inaccuracy, but I thought this was smart. Basically, if he wants to kick me out, he can. He can play like f6, g5, and kick me back to g3. But then what happens is that his structure is like very well advanced, and I'm doing quite well. If he ever trades the bishop, this bishop is very important for him, so I didn't think that would be a big issue. I have knight d2, which I thought was going to be my next move to put pressure on this knight. For example, if he did something like, I don't know, knight b6 or something. I know this is a bad move. I was going to play something like knight d2. Actually, b6 would just hang the pawn. Knight b6. Knight b6, takes, and then I'd probably go for something like knight d2 here, and I'm attacking the knight. The knight doesn't really have a good square. Knight's probably gonna have to go back here, and then I'm just much better. So that was kind of my whole plan. I go bishop g5, and my opponent goes f6, taking my bishop back one square. Always reasonable. And now my opponent goes for this move, bishop g8, bishop h8, which is a massive blunder. The idea is very straightforward. The idea is that he doesn't want his knight to be trapped, and the bishop would be blocking that square. So if he didn't play that move, if he played like h6, this traps the knight. Well, not exactly, but pretty much. A better way to do it might be knight d2 here, and now I'm just going to win the pawn. Or he's going to go here, I'm going to take, he's going to take, and then he's going to have an open king for the future, which is actually a lot better than the pawn. So now he plays bishop h8, and I go knight g2, my whole idea. Now the knight comes back to g7, very reasonable. That's why he played bishop h8 in the first place. My computer is going to kill itself, but that's not with chess. So let's get back into the normal chess. And we're just going to deal with it because I don't want to restart the stream. I will not stream the recording, I guess. And I go captures, and I take the pawn for free. Now I'm up a pawn. I have a lot of different ideas here. I have a lot of like plans that I can go for. The original plan was just to play like rook c1, bring the rook, and then I would just develop my pieces, and I'd be fine. The reason why this works is because the knight is untouchable. Even if the queen is able to touch it, I'm able to play bishop c4 with a pin on the king. So that would never work. My opponent goes knight f5. I come back, takes, and my opponent goes knight b8, and I thought this was bad. Oh, I thought this was bad. I don't know why they would play knight b8 instead of something more natural like knight b6 perhaps. Very reasonable move, but for some reason knight b8 struck their fancy a little bit more. I guess after knight b6 I would probably capture, maybe a-b. Either way, it's interesting. Maybe I'd probably play a take with a queen, and then I could get a queen trade. I get into this position, and here, I mean, I'm up a pawn. I'm clearly up a pawn. I have decent play, but this is probably my opponent's best chance to make a draw. What my opponent does instead is go knight b8, and I go rook c1, which gets a little double exclam from the computer. This isn't really a brilliant move, but it kind of counts. The idea is obviously if the queen takes the knight, I get this, and I win the game. So my opponent can't do that. And I'm also threatening the move knight c7, which would trap the rook. And my opponent freaks out here. My opponent makes a horrendous mistake. Horrendous mistake. What they say is not really the first mistake that kills you. It's the second, and this is the second mistake. My opponent goes bishop e6, which obviously loses to knight c7. Very, very straightforward. I'm now attacking both the rook and the bishop. So the best move here is probably to come back like this. And then after I take the rook, I'm able to get out with my knight, and I'm gonna be winning the game. Obviously, my opponent doesn't really oblige and instead decides to develop the knight and loses the bishop with another fork, which is just, oh, it's miserable, misery. And now, of course, I'm waiting for my opponent to resign because this is awful. My opponent's going to lose, and I will be happy with another quick win. Queen d6 instead, and I take the rook. A very reasonable move, obviously. I just want the rook. Rook takes, and I play queen b3, king up, and I immediately go for another strategy, which is knight e4, and I realize that these two are unforkable squares. So what I want to do is put in knight c5 and bring my knight here and have a decent game with even more material waiting for me. Queen back actually just accentuates it because now knight e6 is impossible to defend. My opponent's gonna have to lose another exchange, and with that, my opponent resigns. So that was a pretty fun game, and let's get into the next one. All right, we're back with number 2, and this game is again kind of the same as the last game, but this time I'm playing black. My opponent goes for knight f3. I don't know why it would be the same as the last game. I don't know why I said that. Whatever, I'm just not going to. Yeah, I play d5. This is the ready opening, so I go d5, and I go for just a normal position. G3, knight f6, bishop g2, g7. We're getting to some type of symmetrical, and yeah, we get into a purely symmetrical game after castles. And knight d2 is the first difference in the position. Now I could go knight d7, knight b7, and continue with the symmetry, but I decide to instead switch it up with something like rook e8 with an interesting idea. I want to go knight b7, but later. I want to go knight b7 when I can prepare e5. And I thought this was pretty smart because e5 is a very good try here to try and make something happen. I'm going to play c6. I'm going to play knight b7. And my bishop is going to get out later. My queen is going to get out later. And these three pieces are not really in the game right now, and they will be developed after. So knight e5, reasonable. And now I go knight b7, putting pressure on the knight and keeping my pawn on d5 defended. Knight f3, and I decide, okay, I have an idea here. I'm gonna go knight a4. This is kind of, again, with the symmetry, but still my knight is much better on the square. After that, I might be able to take. I might be able to play the move f6 and try to blow up the center like that. My opponent doesn't have f6, so his knight is there, and then I might go for c5 or something and have a pretty decent, better position in general. So c3, I thought was a little bad. I thought this was kind of like I didn't really see what it did. I mean, I guess it blunts my bishop in the future, but I didn't really understand, and I thought I would go for some type of trick here. So I go c6 first of all, and queen b4 with the simple idea of pinning my pawn to the king and developing the queen there if I ever played f6. I go knight b6, and I think I'm being clever here because instead of the normal like normally I would just play like f6 there, I decided to play knight b6 first, and this controls the g4 square as well. And I thought that the knight is probably better placed on e3 than d3. So I decided, I know this is wrong, probably the knight is better on d3, but either way, I prepared f6 like this. My opponent goes here, and I play f6, and my opponent goes back to d3. Very simple. And I put my knight on c4. Yeah, now I have two outposts with my knight. My knights are very, very good, and I'm going to try and win this game because I'm slightly better. I know that, and I think I could probably beat this guy whenever I felt like it. So, knight back, and I decided to trade because I'm like, okay, my knight, first of all, this knight, he's going to take with the bishop. I know this. He's absolutely going to trade that bishop for this knight because this knight is very bad. This bishop is better, but it's blocked. It's blunted by the pawns right now. So I thought that he was going to trade for that. So I took with this knight first. Bishop takes, and I was like, okay. So my knight on c5, c4 is good. But what's better than a knight on c4? The bishop pair. Oh. But this is wrong. This is very, very wrong because, first of all, this bishop is blunted. I have, well, it's glued to this pawn. I have this pin with this pawn, so my opponent is always going to play e4, and I thought, okay, I'm doing quite well. I thought I was doing better here, and I was going to blow up the center because I had the bishop pair, and with a bishop pair, you want open lines. So I played e5, which is a big mistake, and the reason why is very, very well orchestrated by my opponent, who plays the move e4 pretty instantly. Yeah, pretty immediately. And I realized that I was much worse because this pawn can't really be blocked. If I ever go here, you can at least take on b7. And I realized here that I'm in some trouble. So I took, which is another mistake, ed, cd, and bishop here, which is a mistake. Apparently it's better to get a queen trade off, but I thought that actually a queen trade would be better for me. But either way, I'm not the computer. I'm not saying I am. So let's just get a normal chess. I go king h8, and he takes, and I am down a pawn, which is really rough. First of all, I go rook b8. The first thing I do, I realize my position is bad. I know that. I know my position is bad, but I'm not gonna like keel over and die like immediately. So I'm defending my pawn on b7. I might push it in some line, and I might want to devote the bishop to a6 in some line. So my opponent goes knight c5, and I didn't realize why this was good. I didn't realize. I thought this just like allowed me b6 like easily. So I played b6 because I thought the knight was better than the bishop. After like knight here, bishop takes, I thought I was doing decently. I didn't really think that it was that bad for me. So b6, knight out, takes, and I of course play the move queen d6, attacking the bishop. And now my opponent plays this move rook e1, and I thought that he might have made a mistake, because this is walking into a pin. This is just walking into a pin, and I double up. I think in hindsight I should double up like this instead, but either way, it's still reasonable no matter what. We get the same position either way. Rook e7, d5, and I play this move rook e7, and the threat is of course to take this bishop. Rook takes, and I would take this rook at the end, and that would be half decent, because even though he gets one square away from queening, I have this check and I can come back and take the pawn. So rook here, I go f5, opening up my bishop, putting some pressure on the b2 pawn. My opponent goes with this move queen b5, which does a couple of things. One, this activates the queen. This activates the queen by attacking the rook. This defends this rook with the queen, and the pawn keeps being defended. So I play this move h6. The reason why is because I thought, okay, well, if I don't play h6, if I, let's say hypothetically, I play this. Bishop f7 happens, I thought. And after takes, I thought that he might have something here after recaptures. And then, I don't know. I thought that this might be bad for me. Yeah, apparently of course I would take the queen, but let's say instead of a6 we play a5. Let's go here. I thought this was bad. I thought this was bad for me. It's not. It's a draw, but it's hard to see why, and I didn't really see why. Why is actually pretty simple. I mean, although he has an extra pawn, I'm able to win the pawn on b2 in many lines, so it's not really in the world. Anyway, that didn't happen. I went h6, and bishop f7, takes, and I am so stupid. I am such an idiot. I totally forgot about his threat. The best move here is king h7 to defend the pawn extra and keep everything tidy. Instead of doing that, I played queen f6, which is like the only way to blunder checkmate, which is so funny. I had obviously blundered checkmate at queen e8 and queen g8, but it's just kind of sad that I messed up so badly. Yeah, so that was 2 games. Yeah, that's kind of how chess goes sometimes. You win a nice game and then you lose in a really simple, stupid fashion that you shouldn't have. Either way, let's finish up the video here. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found this video instructive. Yeah, good evening and good night.